Terra Russell-Slavin is the Deputy Director of the Policy and Community Building at the Los Angeles LGBT Center, where she is working to develop a leading LGBT policy department at the largest LGBT organization. Prior to this position, I'm going to say Terra, not Slavin. Yes. Terra was the center's lead staff attorney, where she was responsible for overseeing the delivery of comprehensive and holistic legal services for LGBT survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Terra serves on the governance committee of the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs and is a representative of NCAVP on the steering committee of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, the main coalition of service providers that work to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, which included LGBT explicit protections for the first time, an effort which Terra co-chaired. You must really love some of the people in this administration. She is also on the executive committee of Transform California, which seeks to increase awareness and protections for the transgender community. Terra is the liaison to the ABA, which is the American Bar Association, Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. Terra graduated from Northeastern University School of Law. I'd like to introduce Terra.
Definitely shorter. And I did that all 2 years. No. So thank you very much for having me tonight. Yes, that helps. And I actually have a pretty loud voice too. So if I start getting elevated in the back, let me know. So thank you very much for having me tonight. I think not surprising, many underserved and marginalized communities in this country right now are feeling very concerned. And that includes LGBT communities, and particularly LGBT communities at the intersection, whether it's undocumented immigrants, communities of color, trans communities, and that really one of the tasks that I'm sort of undertaking right now is how do we what steps are we going to be taking as both this administration unfolds and over the next 4 years to ensure the protections of LGBT individuals and all communities are not rolled back. So a little bit about the center. We were actually founded in 1969, and we provide more services to LGBT individuals than any other organization in the world. We have about 46,000 client visits a month and about 580 staff members. I know, most people think LGBT Center and they think like 10 people in a room. We have 8 sites. We provide services in 4 main areas: health, social services and housing, cultural and education, and then leadership and advocacy. I'm in the leadership and advocacy department. And our goal is really to fight against bigotry, to ensure that there's a better world for everyone where people can be healthy, equal, and complete, including LGBT community members. And so a little bit more about our services as a whole. We really start as a health center. So we are a federally qualified healthcare center, something that happened during the last administration. One of the first LGBT organizations to actually get that designation. And before that, we actually started as an HIV and AIDS clinic during the AIDS crisis. And we offer legal services, primarily focused on survivors of violence, including hate crimes, domestic violence, sexual violence, but we also provide services across a broad range of areas. We have homeless youth services. So we offer beds to people for 1 night up to 18 months. And every day we have about 100 homeless youth who access our services, which include warm breakfasts, lunches, showers, GED courses, and sometimes just a place to sit and rest before going back out on the street. We do senior services. Most people don't often think about LGBT seniors, which is really one of the we're really looking at the first generation of LGBT seniors who are out in larger numbers. And what does that mean? And one of the first meetings I had in my own center was with our senior department, and a lot of the clients were expressing how they were afraid to walk out their buildings, right? That they were concerned that they hadn't felt that way in a very long time. And unfortunately, we've also seen a rise in hate incidents since the election. And then myself, I happen to be situated in our policy department, and we provide, do policy advocacy on a vast range of issues, including health, anti-violence, youth and education. We do, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but direct voter canvassing, one-on-one conversations, and then pretty much any and everything where LGBT communities are implicated, or where we're also standing with other communities. So we stay busy, and it's clearly been very busy in the wake of the election. Yesterday, actually, I helped coordinate with the Los Angeles LGBT Bar Association and Beth Zedek a name and gender change legal clinic. And we had more than 100 members of the trans and gender nonconforming communities there to get paperwork because of the concerns that that might not be an option going forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So I also think when we think about policy in relation to the LGBT community, we have to acknowledge that the last 8 years have been a time of significant and incredible progress. This administration that we have had has done more for the LGBT community. It's not even comparable. I mean, there have been hundreds and hundreds of protections put into place. Now the challenge has been is that almost all of those protections are through executive actions and through administrative advocacy. And so one of the concerns is that those are going to be some of the first places that those protections can be rolled back. I want to talk about a few of those. One concern that we're really trying to stay attuned to is called the First Amendment Defense Act. And what this, and a lot of people, and I actually, so I was actually at a family Thanksgiving, and it was really interesting because a lot of people's response has been like, well, Trump himself has not necessarily had the worst, in quotes, right, views on LGBT individuals and communities. His Vice President, Mike Pence, pretty much took the most radical anti-LGBT views of any candidate, including an act in Indiana that pretty much mirrors the federal First Amendment Defense Act, except for it's the federal government. So the implication is all 50 states. And what it would do is essentially allow people in states to claim that they could, like if you're a homeless shelter, you could turn away a gay man and say, even if you're receiving federal funds, even if it's in violation of sort of the non-discrimination policies, if you claimed it was on the basis of religion. And the problem is it's very, very broad, and it could have huge implications. So that is something we really are going to be paying attention to. And we think there's going to be a large act, but there's also going to be, already have been efforts to implement this in smaller pieces as new legislation has been coming up. I think on a good front, for most people who are already in LGBT marriages, it's not something that we think is going to be rolled back, at least for now. Because it was a Supreme Court decision, we had Kennedy on our side. It will take 2 Supreme Court justices, and it would be unusual for a decision like that to go forward to the court quickly. That being said, relationship recognition is going to be a concern, particularly a concern crossing state lines. So I actually grew up in Texas, and I can say that, up until very recently, actually, some of the news, the Supreme Court law, right? Like, there were moments and times where my relationship with my wife would not have been protected in Texas. And so it's going to become increasingly important that as a community, and this isn't just for LGBT issues, but do you have paperwork in place? Do you have your living wills, your healthcare proxies, documents that sort of assert your ability so that your family and the people or your chosen family are going to have access to you in an emergency. So starting to think about those sorts of things. Starting to think about as a non-bio parent, even if your name is on a birth certificate, right? Even if you've been in a marriage, as a non-bio parent, do you need to take taking extra steps for protection? Again, thinking about crossing state lines. We're very fortunate to live in our blue state, but we travel. Right? All of us travel. And
are you already encouraging people to sort of belt and suspenders? It's like, okay, you're married and you have the protections of marriage, but worst case scenario, you also have all these other documents. Is that what you're
absolutely
saying? Is
yes.
that people you know, there's two layers of legal work to be done. There's the spouse thing, and then there's another,
Yeah.
just in case.
Yes,
Okay. And there's
highly recommend it.
cost.
There is cost, is it? And then there's some places, like, for example, the clinic we did yesterday was free. And so it's thinking about, and like that's a place where people have been raising money to help trans people pay for the court filing fee is $435. So there those type of efforts. But I think particularly, I feel like around the relationship, people have stopped thinking about needing some of those added protections. And with some of the federal rollbacks, I think it becomes increasingly important as we travel, but even not as we travel. If you have things like the First Amendment Defense Act, what that could mean in a religiously based, hospital, right? Like, so those sorts of things. I don't want to be all dire, right? I'm just trying to, but I do think we need to be thinking about what we do to protect ourselves in this moment. And so, on that note, there is actually going to be a huge Supreme Court decision that's going to be heard this term. It's called Gloucester County School Board versus GG. And that is the case involving essentially the first trans-specific case at the Supreme Court. It's a Title IX interpretation of whether sex is going to cover gender identity. And this is going to be really important for ensuring that trans students have access to facilities in accordance with their gender identity. So this is something we are closely monitoring, and I think on that note, we are very concerned about how this administration is.
Can't that just be, I mean, this is the bathroom?
Yeah, it is.
So, that, on day one, I mean, what we're anticipating is a stack of executive actions that are just.
Not that one.
Okay.
That's Title IX guidance that you're thinking of that went to the schools that's actually already on hold. But this is a law under, I mean, this is essentially interpretation of sex in law. So yes. And I think that's the big thing, right, is where do we have legislative protections that are going to require more? Where do we have regulations that require a little less than legislative but can be changed more easily? And then where do we have executive actions? And where, even when we have legislative pieces like Affordable Care Act, can those be undone legislatively, with the right will? So, so that's one of the areas. And that being said, this anti-trans last year, right after, it was essentially a year ago in November when Houston voted on their equal rights ordinance and defeated an anti-LGBT, they sort of rolled back LGBT protections. What we saw across this country is a wave of right-wing attacks on the trans community, and more than 50 pieces of legislation introduced across this country, and most notably, what most people know about is HB 2 in North Carolina. And that was the one that was, I think, specifically kind of entitled the Bathroom Bill, also included religious, sort of broad religious exemptions, and really put trans lives at risk. And so that's something I've spent a lot of the last year actually very focused on, both in my role on Transform California, and because in California we've had 2 attempts to get ballot initiatives here in California to sort of roll back protections for trans people. Thank goodness it has not actually made the ballot. The first time it missed by 20,000 signatures. Yeah. So those are things we really need to be on top of. Another issue is our immigrant community. And I'm sure most people have been following this. This is an area where there's an incredible amount of federal authority from the executive branch. And so it's an area that's particularly vulnerable, and we know what sort of statements were made during the campaign. There are many LGBT DACA recipients, and there are grave concerns there. I think areas where we have seen people really access the system include asylum for people who are persecuted in their home countries on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We also have, we also have U visas for victims of crime. And so those areas have more protection, but this whole area is a place where I just feel like, both, we all need to be standing to sort of ensure protections for our immigrant communities here and elsewhere, but particularly knowing how many vital members of our community are a part of that. A couple other things really briefly, like we're really following is healthcare, Affordable Care Act, right? Tons and tons of people got healthcare for the first time. This is a huge issue, has massive budget implications in the state of California. And so this is an area where we're really considering, like, following and very, very concerned about what happens. And then there's the issue of some of the appointments. So, and this is an area where I think there's advocacy to be done. There are lots and lots of, I mean, sometimes it feels like I wake up and I'm actually like, did it get worse? So these appointments have been pretty extreme. And the two that I've been really following are Senator Jeff Sessions, who has had very incredibly anti-LGBT, he voted against hate crime protections. He voted against the Violence Against Women Act. He voted, I mean, he has a very long history. And this is the person who's going to be in charge with enforcing our laws and enforcing our non-discrimination protections. And so I just want to encourage everyone to, even though we're in California, it is still really important that we make our voices heard about what do we expect them not. They're going to have to pick and choose their battles. We want to be influencing in which battles they're choosing. Another person that we're really paying attention to is also Representative Price for Health and Human Services, which as a general rule has been a major point of funding for LGBT services, homeless youth, health services, just generally. And he also has come out and had some pretty, across the board, and with both of these people, you're not just looking at anti-LGBT sentiment, you're looking at anti-women, the list goes on. And so those are areas where we're really encouraging people to step up. One thing I want to say in terms of specific action. So I thought about this a bit because we're really in the planning phase. We're trying to, figure out, collate information, learn as much as we can, and then assess, where does it make the most sense to, take action and intervene. And so I wasn't quite sure at this point if we fully know that. But one of the programs that we have within our policy department is called Leadership Lab. And they really focus on the one-on-one voter conversations. And this emerged actually as a result of Prop 8. And then during Prop 8, people actually really expected the LGBT community to win. The polls were positive. There was, they're going in, there was a lot of excitement. And then sort of overnight, all of a sudden there was a huge, huge defeat. I'm like, does it remind us of any time? Sure. And as in the wake of that, we really invested in trying to figure out what happened, right? What went wrong, and where did we get, the information on the polls? Why was it so different? And so we started actually going out and engaging with people who voted yes on Prop 8, which was anti-LGBT marriage, and just having conversations, one-on-one voter conversations, and in a non-judgmental manner, and trying to figure out and learn as much as we could, and then ultimately with the goal of trying to persuade people. And this, we usually particularly, right, if you had a scale of 10, right, you have the 10 who aren't gonna have any potential concerns about what's happening, but like those people between the 6 and the 8, starting there, which is where most people are at any given time. And so one of the things that they are going to do is on January 21st, and I know there's a big protest happening on January 20th, but the next day, the Leadership Lab is going to do a canvassing in an area that voted primarily for Trump, and is actually trying to go out and talk one-on-one at the door with Trump voters. And they will do an hour-and-a-half training. They provide tons of support. And it's a really great opportunity for learning how do we engage and how do we talk, to the opposition. And there are two goals, and I thought this was good. One was to find out why people voted for Trump. What was the reasoning behind it? And two is then how do we begin to dismantle the prejudice that allowed for that to happen? It's really about prejudice reduction. And so I put on that sheet of paper the contact information for the people organizing this event, and I encourage you, you can email, you can call, they would love to have you. And I have actually gone on the canvassing. I've done one on anti-trans initiatives with them. And they go out there all the time. They were actually in Ohio during the election. And so it's a really great experience. It's hard. I personally am not, I'm from Texas. I sometimes think I'm like, you go up to someone's door, seems a little scary. Yeah, exactly. But they really, they train people, you go out, and it's a great opportunity, and I just think an incredible experience. And it's all about tools and skills to have those conversations. And I think those are the things that we have to start taking into the next 4 years if we are going to turn the tide. So.
You want to take some questions?
Yes?
Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Sure.
It's a good way to practice your mediation skills.
Sure.
Just a comment.
Oh, the mediation skills on the one-on-one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Practice.
Sure. Any questions?
Do you have, like in the beginning for like same-sex marriages and they have kids, do you have a list of all those resources like somewhere available if I wanted to like share with people? If I didn't take any notes and I'm not going to remember every single one of them?
Yes. No, that's a great, okay, so for resources so I put our website up there.
Okay.
But I think if you want specific resources, I think the organizations that are a little more geared on family protections in LGBT communities are the National Center for Lesbian Rights and Lambda Legal. Both of those you could Google easily find. And they have a lot of just fact sheets.
Can you say that again? And I'll
Yes,
text it to myself?
absolutely.
And we'll post it on our page
Okay.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get it from Tara.
But National Center for Lesbian Rights and Lambda Legal, both who have California-based offices. And they're really good for just like the actual rights and protections. If you are wanting to like refer someone to talk to an attorney about this for I think it's $10, it may be free, the center actually provides that. We have volunteer family law attorneys who will provide consultations to people one-on-one. Yeah. Yes?
Earlier, were you referring to the Russell Amendment?
Yes, and that was one of the examples.
Okay, because you didn't mention it, I mean, by name, but it sounded a lot like it. And, I mean, that just has like really far-reaching effects.
Yes.
So how can we find, like, what is going on with that? I mean, is Obama just going to veto it if it has it in it? Or, I mean,
I think they actually got it out. The key, if I recall, I think they're just biding their time. I think I heard someone, McCain, say something literally like, this isn't going to be the time, you know. So I would expect it in the next, like the introduction of next Congress. But it's not even just the Russell Amendment. They've literally been doing little things like that in most of the legislation that has been coming up. And for people that, in particular, one of the things that people are really looking at is an executive order. It was a really significant when Obama signed an executive order essentially saying federal contractors could not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's one of the ones that will sort of Russell Amendment would affect, and just generally there's a worry of kind of an immediate repeal. Also, I always am a little, because it's being filmed, but this also, I'm sure people have heard this, like there's this thing where you're like, we don't want to give them the what to target.
yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so there's like that, you know, there's that element as well going on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.